What's going on, everybody? Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Christian Perez. This is the Vector Podcast. I'm excited to have you all here. And today in particular, we have a very special guest with us. I want to read a little bit about Brittinie Wick because she is a fantastic individual. Connected on LinkedIn, and there's some people who you just kind of gravitate towards. Now, in part, I would perhaps argue that a lot of it is because her veteran experience and just how open she is to discussing a lot of what she does. But something about like her character and her demeanor, just she has this gravitas. And it's been wonderful, actually getting to know her and talking with her. All that to say, so Brittinie Wick, she is a U.S. Air Force veteran, doctor of physical therapy, strength coach, and founder of the Women Serve 2 podcast. As a prior service woman, military spouse, and mom of 4, Brittinie is passionate about amplifying the voices of women who serve in uniform, at home, and in leadership. Brittinie launched Women Serve 2 in 2024 to create space for honest conversations around military transition, mental health, identity loss, entrepreneurship, and leadership for women, veterans, and service members. Her work bridges the gap between service and self, helping women move from survival to strength. With a background in business and healthcare, Brittinie brings a unique lens that blends resilience, research, and real life. Whether discussing veteran advocacy, strength training science, or building purpose-driven brand, she delivers practical insight with authenticity and depth. Brittinie, is an absolute pleasure to have you on the podcast. So thank you so much for coming.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to chat with you. And kind of like you mentioned earlier, we just kind of gravitated towards each other on LinkedIn, and it's just almost been kind of like friends right off the bat type vibe. So it's great, and I love being here.
Do you feel like that's just the case for veterans across the board? Like, I've had multiple experiences where it's very difficult to kind of come out of your shell sometimes, but all of a sudden you find out that somebody's a veteran, and it's almost like you just vibe, you just click.
Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts?
Honestly, 1,000% agree with that. And I've even noticed it when, working in healthcare and my patients. So I'm currently in San Antonio, so Military City, USA. And so the veteran population, the active duty population is huge over here. And where I work, there's a ton of veterans coming in, getting rehab. And they're usually those old crusty men who don't want to talk about it, but do want to talk about it. And they're very reserved. They're like, I don't want to be here. And I'm like, but once I know they're a veteran, I'm like, oh, what'd you do? And then we start talking about it. Their attitude towards rehab, towards me, towards everything just immediately changes.
And I feel like that's ingrained in sort of the military culture. It's because it's such a unique culture, right? There's this immediate connection where it's every veteran has sort of been through the same thing in some way, shape, or form, whether it be Air Force, Navy, Marine Corps. You've all been through the same thing. That in and of itself is sufficient to make this immediate connection. And I love it. I love it. And like I said, it's an absolute pleasure to meet you. I'm glad we connected, and I'm glad you're here. Now, let's start sort of from the beginning, right? So first of all, let's talk about your military experience. What drove you to join the military? What did you do in the military? Talk to us a little bit about that.
Well, so we're millennials, right? So some people may not know this movie from Disney, but do you remember Cadet Kelly with Hilary Duff?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So that movie genuinely inspired me. So I think I was in 5th, 6th grade. I think I was in middle school, early middle school. And that movie came out, and I was I told my uncle who was in the Army, I was like, I want to join. And so it kind of always was ingrained, especially since my dad was like, I'm not paying for any of your college. And so college was a huge aspiration of mine, as you could tell from all of my letters behind my name. But so right in high school, I knew I was going to join the military, but I was under the impression I was going to do Actually, I was only going to do the reserves, but the reserve recruiter screwed me over. So then things were getting a little spicy at home. Well, in a rebellion type way, I signed up with active duty. And when my dad and I got into it, I was like, oh, by the way, I'm shipping out on July 21st. I decided to do active duty, and I was under the impression I was going to do 4 years. I wanted to be a lawyer. Clearly, that didn't work out. So I decided to do intel operations, and I was a pretty decent briefer. So I chose the briefing side of intel. And they sent me to Germany on my first duty station. So 18 overseas was just a very wild time. So I always considered those being my college years, because you could drink in the dorms, you're going out on town, getting wasted, and then having to go to work at 7 a.m. So I did intel in Germany, and then I met my husband there, and he straight up told me, he was like, I'm going to be a career military. And so that was kind of something I knew early on, was that I was going to be a military spouse. But I was like, I'm only doing 4. Well, he got orders to why not North Dakota. And I said, fuck that. All right. I looked at every option for me. I was like, there's no law school. There was no intel civilian jobs. There was nothing for me. And so I was like, fuck, the Air Force got me like for another 4 years. So then we ended up getting stationed in Vegas. And that was also a blast. But I was at Creech, which sucked. But working with like the drones in like the Middle East, Libya, Horn of Africa, Syria, I mean, literally all over. And then towards the end of that military experience, I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do on the outside. So then I ended up going to for my MBA. And that's kind of how I transitioned out.
How did you know that you wanted to really get into the intel side? Like, what drew you to that?
Well, I listened to my dad.
Oh, all right.
Yeah, well, it was more because, I thought I wanted to be a politician. Yeah, like, yeah,
No, no,
18-year-old
hey,
Brittany
that's
was like way different than current Brittany, but he was like, if you want to be a lawyer and you want to go into politics, like having more of the background in intel is going to help you. So he pitched it more as like resume building. So I was like, okay, that sounds great. And that's essentially why I did it, because I thought it was going to help me kind of get into law school and then kind of set my career up post-military.
While you're actively pursuing this specific specialty in the military with intel, at the time that you were doing so, was this a particularly like male-dominated field, or was it pretty split 50-50?
I would say early on, it was definitely still like very male dominated. I mean, when I got to Germany in my first term airman course, where like you kind of learn everything about the base and stuff like that, it was me and two other women in a class of like 30. It was already, Intel was, I will say, a little bit more, they had more females, but I would still say it's very male dominated. But towards the end of my career, I would say it was getting a good mixture, and it was leaning more probably like 30 to 40 to 60%.
It is unbelievable what a lot of like women in particular are capable of doing in that field in and of itself. Do you think that is that true from your experience? If so, why is that? And if not, what is your take on it?
That's an interesting question, because like I know with Intel, you have to score very high on the ASVAB, and not saying that men aren't as intelligent. I just think women they scored better on the ASVAB. So they were
Mhm.
giving more of those opportunities to be more of the brains, while the guys are more of like the grunt. Obviously, that's not, the case across the board, but I do think there's certain career fields that are going to be a little bit more female dominated. Healthcare is a huge one, like the nurses, and doctors. Intel is a big one as well. And I think those two are probably your more female dominated career fields.
And in many ways, I feel like you kind of ended up doing both. Would you
Yeah.
agree with that? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. My journey is all over the place.
Oh, I mean, that's awesome. That's awesome. Okay, so so you do the intel side of things. I've gone abroad in Germany. Did you ever get a chance to deploy? Just out of curiosity, like
We
a
were,
combat deployment?
so we were considered deployed at station.
Okay, okay, gotcha.
So anytime that we would go to work, we were in like a quote, quote combat zone. So they didn't forward deploy us because we were already kind of like in that situation.
No, perfect. I mean, that makes perfect sense, and it's great for like the audience to sort of understand that aspect of things. Because if you've never been in the military, I can see how some people would be like, "Well, how exactly does that work?" But I totally, totally get it. Do you want to elaborate just a little bit more on like what exactly that means to be basically like deployed on station?
Yeah. So like at work, so with our drones, right? Like you don't have to physically be near the drone. So there's a whole bunch of technology and communication lines that start essentially actually at Creech. A lot of our stuff, our pilots and sensor operators are at Creech, but there's obviously a couple other bases. But the aircraft is over in whatever area. So we'll say Middle East to keep it simple. So we'll go to essentially a skiff. So super classified, no windows, like triple locked building where you're in there and you're looking at certain feeds of the aircraft being deployed. So at that point, we're looking at compounds. We're following people, we're helping troops on ground. And so even though we're not physically there, our aircraft that our pilots and sensor operators were essentially managing, we were able to see it in real time and be able to kind of essentially collect intel at that point. And depending on our customers, because the feed, you could see it almost anywhere. They'll be like, okay, well, we see this person right here. We need you to fly, or we need you to rotate the sensor this direction, or we're going to a different compound 5 clicks north. So even though we weren't physically there, we were attached to essentially our aircraft and being able to decipher that intel.
I find that particularly fascinating, right? Because like what you're basically describing is this brilliant sort of like interconnected network between the human and machine, and how you're able to operate basically uniformly, and you're able to function in theater despite not necessarily being physically there. So, I mean, there's so much that we can talk about it just in that aspect. But let me ask you this: what is that like you go to work, you go into your skiff, you're watching all these sensors, you're seeing everything in real time happening, hundreds of miles away.
Mhm.
and at some point you clock out and you go back home and you're sort of back to your normal life? Like, what is that like? Is it hard to kind of balance that sort of like almost like dual existence, if you will?
I will say a lot of people struggle with that. With where Creech is at, it's north of Las Vegas. So you have at least a 35-minute drive. So a lot of people would use that time to essentially decompress and try to switch from like more of that combat mindset to, okay, now I got to be a mom, a dad, a friend, a brother, a sister, whatever. But there are some people who do struggle with, separating it without actually being deployed. So I know people who have like personally deployed, they're like, okay, well, I was in that mindset for 6 to 12 months or however long that deployment is. So they didn't have to think about anything else. But then on the flip side, you're at work, you're thinking like combat type stuff for 8 hours. And then we were essentially supposed to flip it off for 30 minutes and try to switch. So a lot of people struggled finding that balance. And our unit did try to be a little bit more proactive as far as like, okay, like our resiliency and like how can we do better. But I think for me it was more the fact because I was traumatized early on in my career by an Islamic extremist shooting one of my friends in the head, that it was super easy for me to be like, okay, it's between us and them. And like, I'm going to try to stop another attack from a loved one. And then when I go home, I could still like justify what I've done or been a part of. I think for me, that was like more of like, that's why it was easier for me because like I was already traumatized early on. And I was like, I don't want another family member or friend to die
Right.
essentially. And then, yeah, so for me, it wasn't as hard because I had that mindset of, okay, it's them or us. And especially when we were doing like the Afghanistan stuff, there was a lot of times that we were working with like the British Royal Air Force or like the Marines or special ops. And when we see them getting attacked, it's easier for me to be like, okay, let's like get these fuckers. So we're protecting, our people. So it was just a little bit, for me, it was a little bit easier, but I do know a lot of people did struggle with kind of going back and forth from that mindset.
How exactly did you process all of that?
Probably was a little bit more traumatized than I realized at the time. I mean, because mental health, regardless, like, it's still a stigma. Like, especially with having a top secret clearance or being in a very high specialty program, like, you can't say that you're struggling with it. And so for me, I had nightmares all the time. And it was very weirdly specific. Like I would have these terrorists chasing me, my brother, and my sister, and then it would end up me sacrificing myself to protect my brother and my sister. So like I would have these like reoccurring nightmares. I'd have panic attacks. Whatever. But for me, I actually just turned to fitness, and that's why it kind of led into that direction because I couldn't talk to anyone. It was like my way to decompress. So I would try to go to the gym after shift or like towards the end of my shift so that I would use that time to just kind of decompress, kind of like fix my sanity before going back into the quote, quote, real world.
Well, now we're sort of in a very different position. And what I mean by that is we're sort of at this divide, right? Where we have individuals like yourself who are capable, trained, and executing these missions and are more than willing to do it. But then there's the flip side of that is given the progress that we've made with artificial intelligence and autonomous technology,
Mhm.
we can in many ways kind of delegate that to the machine, right? Now my curiosity and my question for you is where does the moral and ethical line lie? Is that the appropriate approach given the nature of a lot of these missions? Also weighing in the fact that like at the end of the day, let's just say hypothetically we said, no, like we should let machines operate and execute these. Well, at that point, you're also salvaging the human that's having to otherwise execute these missions, right?
Mhm.
I guess the underlying question is, what do we do about AI and autonomous vehicles, autonomous drones in combat?
I mean, that actually brings up like a very good question. And that could potentially be the future, right? Like kind of taking the human aspect out to protect the mental health. But I think the technology has to get so good of like facial recognition and like movement patterns and stuff like that to be able to identify like a target or an individual. And you're still going to need that human aspect before like the machine says, okay, I'm going to go strike, right? We still need to get that approval. So there's still, I don't think it's ever going to be 100%. But I definitely do think more of the collection of the data and the intel without the human constantly looking at the compound, I do see that as a potential for the future. So like, for instance, like towards the end of my career, we were in a certain area where there wasn't a lot of movement, if you will. So we were looking at very high valued individuals. And by that time, they're very secretive. They're almost like recluse. So you're staring at a fucking compound for like ever. And then so like at that point, we could have those AI drones just constantly just do the mission without us just watching while we could look somewhere else and then alert us and be like, "Oh, I noticed movement. We should get like human contact to look at this feed." So I think there's ways that we could easily integrate that.
We are capable of, in theory, saying if X, Y, and Z criteria are met, the autonomous vehicle can strike. We can say that. Now, should we is a whole different story.
Mhm.
And that's sort of my question to you is that where you would draw the line? Is a strike should the liability and the ultimate, responsibility lie on the human? Or do you
Mm.
foresee a future wherein if certain criteria are met, the machine should be able to operate autonomously?
That's a good question. I still think there has to be some human aspect. Only because, like, a young kid could look a lot older. So, if the criteria is, okay, we identified him, he's not in a city, and there's going to be low casualties, like, let's go ahead and strike. But there's like a 12-year-old right next to him who just had a growth spurt and looks like he's 18. Now we're going into like, okay, should the AI just automatically determine like this is the prime time to do it, but that human aspect, like we're going to be able to tell, like, no, that's actually a kid. It's not another like militant. So I do think maybe eventually, like if we could really dial it in, but as of right now and maybe in the near future, I think there's still a very fine line.
I can definitively attest that AI is already well embedded in battlefields, that you're already in many ways operating in a very sort of physically at a distance detached manner. You're already detached in that regard, but the liability and the onus, the responsibility still lies on you as the operator, as the human being with eyes on. And I think that that's the hardest thing to close the loop on, right? Is like, at what point does the liability lie on the human? So it is very interesting to get your take on that specifically. Do you think that do you think that the combat zone is going to continue to evolve to the point that we see more autonomy, or should that never be the case?
Personally, I don't think that should ever be the case because if AI fucks up, if right, like it could sometimes be wrong. Who do we blame? Because we're always going to have to blame someone, right? Like we can't just be like, oh well, AI fucked up, so we're just going to chalk it up to a loss. People are going to get outraged and be like, no, we need to know why that messed up, or
Hmm.
like why. People are going to want answers and solutions, and so I personally don't think we'll ever be like 100% autonomous. Like I do think there's going to have to be some human aspect to it. We have people down, boots on ground still. So
Okay.
we usually do it that way too. But I mean, usually after a strike or whatever, we're getting all the feeds from different angles. So with a strike, we don't just have one aircraft. We have multiple aircraft strike. There's multiple aircraft looking at the compound or the person, so in different views. And all of it gets recorded. And afterwards, that all gets debriefed and looked at. So that's how we do like the collateral damage from different perspectives, depending if you're the watchbird or if you're the striking bird or whatever. So that's usually how we'll figure out if it's actual collateral is the crew will debrief and then we'll be like, yes, it was a successful strike. No, it wasn't. Why it worked well, why it didn't work well. And then there's analysts that also kind of look at, okay, well, if this didn't work well, why? And then they'll look at the footage.
I want to push the conversation to you and your career after the military. How many years total did you do?
Little under 8.
Okay, gotcha. So a little under 8 years. When did you decide? Okay, it's time to hang up the uniform. What was that like? And what was the first day, like the day that you woke up and you were like, "I'm not in the military anymore." What was that like?
Yeah, it was definitely super bizarre, and I feel like, I've talked to a lot of veterans with this as well, is the transition going from military to civilian is a very hard transition simply because you were a part of a big mission and then now you're just kind of nobody. So I feel like it was really hard. For me, I got fed up with leadership. I had a horrible, horrible leadership my whole career. I just got tired of it. And I was like, I palace chased, which means like I got out 6 months earlier than my contract because I was like, I'm fed up with this. Like, I just didn't even want to do my last 6 months because the leadership was just so shitty. So that was why I got out. And for me, transitioning out was probably and it's probably something I still struggle with, like trying to find purpose again and like trying to find like a different identity. Yeah. So I think the transition was just really hard because I thought I wanted to do something going back to like, I thought I wanted to be a lawyer. I applied to law school, didn't get in. And then I was like, okay, well, now what am I going to do with my life? Which is why it's also being a military spouse is also very limited to going to certain colleges, right? Like
Right.
I had to follow my husband. And so at the time we were still in Vegas, UNLV was my only law school that I could apply to. And so like I wasn't like I could apply to different law schools and just go to law school. And then who knows if I had that opportunity, who knows, I might have been a lawyer today. But that's not how it worked. So then I was like, I always like business. So then I applied for my MBA but even after my MBA, I still wasn't like satisfied. So I
Hmm.
always feel like I'm chasing almost like another goal or like I'm never satisfied because I don't feel like I'm fulfilling my true potential or my true purpose. So I feel like I'm always constantly, even to this day, I mean, shit, I just graduated with my DPT in December. So like I'm still going to school, but always trying to find what my purpose is because when I was in the military, felt like I was a part of something greater than myself. And then now that I didn't have that uniform, I didn't have that mission, I'm still trying to figure out that purpose that's greater than myself.
So for veterans getting out now, for active duty service members that are getting out now, given your experience, given in this pursuit of purpose that for you seems like it's still undying, right? Like there's still like
Mhm,
you still want more out of life, out of your career, out of your success. You want
mhm.
more out of it. If you had one piece of advice to give a veteran or an active duty service member who's like considering getting out now,
Mhm.
what would that look like?
That's a good question because like everyone's different, right? I don't know if you guys had it. TAPS, the transition program. I would assume every branch had it, but you never know. Like I felt when I went through it, it was more of here's a resume. Like this is how you build a resume. And it didn't, I don't know. I just felt like there was so much work with that could be improved, right? Like the mental aspects of the like being a part of a mission and then not being a part of a mission. Like that's a huge mental fuck, right? And then, or trying to figure out what you genuinely want to do is a huge one. Education benefits, which I think are completely underutilized or not even talked about enough. So, like Skill Bridge, where you have that opportunity to try a different career field before you get out of the military. I think more people need to try that or look into just kind of a little bit more of like internships or kind of help set them up for success post military. I know my brother in law, he was Air Force, and he used the skill bridge, and that was probably one of the best things that he did because then he was able to figure out what he wanted to do.
And now with careers, I mean, even careers nowadays are shifting so dramatically, right? So with the advent of
Mhm,
AI, there's less of a. I mean, we see it everywhere. Companies are letting go of people. There's less of a demand for otherwise junior level, sort of like white collar junior level jobs are dwindling and dwindling
mhm.
fast. And a lot of veterans, this is precisely what they want to actively pursue.
My first thing that I'm gonna say is AI is not going away. Like, it is here, and it is gonna be continue to be a part of our future. And I will say that there are a lot more programs coming out to help teach you how to use AI. I think I actually got an email from the VA saying that for the education benefits, like, you don't have to use your GI or anything, but there are certain certificates that will allow you that you could use to learn AI. So I think we're heading in that direction where I do think more veterans do need to, either learn up on it or brush on it or at least get familiar with AI. Cause like I said, it's not going away. My husband, he has 3 years left and he even mentioned looking into like AI certifications because it's our future, essentially. Whether how much or how little it's going to look like in the future, it's like I said, it's not going away. So I do think a lot of people should, kind of start dabbling in it a little bit.
Delegate. So I mean, I agree with you, and I really hope that if there is, like for all the veterans that are listening to this podcast, I would love to echo your sentiments. I encourage you to actively go out, seek out those tools, gain experience, build something, because
Mhm.
it's the kind of thing where you can't just read a book about it. You actively have to use the tools and learn how to operate in that ecosystem in order to
Mhm.
get better. So I'm really glad you said that. Now I want to talk about your podcast, right? Because I think I love the theme. I love
Mhm.
what you do with it. I really think that there needs to be more of that. What got you into it? Why did you start in the first place? Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, common theme, mill to mill, right? So, we joined the same day, we went through the ranks together, but he would always get thanked for his service and upgraded on flights and got all the benefits, and I got nothing. And not to be like I deserved it, but it was just frustrating that we would both hand our ID and then he would get the privileges. And then people just assumed I was just the spouse. And I was like, I found myself constantly saying, women serve too. Why is it so hard for people to understand the grasp or understand the statement that women serve too? Which is the whole point. That's actually the name of the podcast because I just got so frustrated with people assuming that I was just a dependent. And it just bothered me because I was like, no, I did my time. Like I want to be recognized as a veteran, not a dependent. And I think that's even to this day, I struggle with that because I don't want to be like just a dependent. So yeah, that's kind of where it kind of launched from. And then when I initially kind of, thought about it, I didn't know how or what I wanted or how I wanted to go with it. And I was like, you know what, like let's talk about other people's military experience. And then so, I kind of threw the idea out there and I actually got a lot of hits. They're like, I would love to talk about this. I would love to talk about this. And it's like a whole wide range of, different things from like military sexual trauma or like transitions from, being in the military to entrepreneurship or even like with leadership and just kind of how navigating through, so many different things. Like the one that I just launched was about eating disorders. And how that affected her military career and how it could affect military personnel. And, a lot of people, when they think of my podcast or when I say it's Women Serve Too, a lot of people, mainly guys, think that it's, man bashing and, all this other stuff. I'm like, no, that's not the point of the podcast. Like, yes, I have had guests bash certain men on the podcast, but it was more men in their leadership. But that was never my goal. It was our perspectives are uniquely different than a lot of the guys. It is a very male dominant force, and that's not a problem, right? Like that's not the problem. It's just us women sometimes have a little bit more that we need to be considered if we want us to be as effective as a combat person or a service member, if you want us to be essentially up to our full potential.
Hmm. Women in combat roles.
Mm.
Yay or nay?
A lot of people fight me on this too. And not fight, but like a lot of people don't think women should. And here's the thing that I will say. I do not think any standard should be lowered for women to go in. So what I'm saying is, okay, so for special ops, the standard is you're supposed to lift X amount of weight. You're supposed to run X amount of miles in X amount of time. You're supposed to do this, this, and this, and this. If a woman can achieve those measurements, and whatever other test that they need to pass, right? Like I wasn't in that, so I don't know what goes all in there. But if they could pass every standard, why can't they? Because for me, like if they could pass it, what is preventing them from doing so? Like that's the standard for a man. And if a woman could beat that, why can't they? So my argument is if they could pass the test needed to fit that job, then yeah, I think they should. I do not agree with like lowering the standard for like a male has to do so much and a female does so much. Create the standard across the board. If a female could do it, why not?
Now, let's introduce the social dynamic that inevitably, I mean, I would argue inevitably changes.
I think it could, right? I mean, like any relationship is going to affect a job, regardless if it's military or not. I mean, there should be like fraternization. I mean, I guess if they're the same rank, it wouldn't really technically be fraternization. But I mean, say if it was like an enlisted with an officer, like there's already rules to
Right.
avoid those
Mhm.
relationships, right? But it could go both ways, right? The woman could be just as protective as the man. And we're just also assuming straight relationships. I mean, you don't
Sure.
know if the two guys are going to have a relationship or two women are going to have a relationship or whatnot. So, I mean, it could potentially affect it, but some people could also separate that line too. So it's a gray area, right? There's no black and white to that situation. I mean, I could see both ways, to be genuinely honest. Like the guys are going to obviously be a little bit more protective if of their girlfriend, but that doesn't mean the female's not going to be protective of her man.
Right.
Or like they could both just be like, okay, like we got a mission to do. Like fuck our feelings. We got to do this first. So I
I
could
love
see
it.
both ways.
Yeah. What about the draft? Should women be eligible for the draft?
Honestly, I think everyone should do at least 2 years of the military. Be almost like Israel at this
Yes.
point.
Yes.
I personally, that's what I think. I think everyone should do at least a year or two, just kind of like Israel. I, I want to. We haven't did the draft since Vietnam, but I also
Sure.
don't think women should just because they're a woman shouldn't be drafted. So yeah, I like I
Yeah.
said, I agree. Everyone should be already doing
No,
at least like a year or two.
I 100% agree that I think our society would be a far better society if everyone were required to do some sort of service to their country. And it wouldn't even have to necessarily be military. I would go as far as saying that. I would go as far as saying like it doesn't even have to be military service, but some sort of civil service. Do you think most women would agree with you there? Do you
Oh no.
like no, no, you do? Okay.
I
So
don't think so.
I
I
got you.
mean, I think and here's the thing too, you and I have lived through September 11th, right? September 2001 was a whole different America, right?
Yes. Shut
And
up.
and a lot of the generation now, being older now, we're not seeing they're born after September 11th. And we were in Afghanistan for way too long, in my opinion, and we haven't truly been in a war like that. So I don't think their sense of not pride, and I'm not really sure what the word is, but like the patriotism that you and I went through early on in our years. Like, I
Mhm.
think you were, if I did my math right, you were probably like what, fourth, fifth grade?
Exactly.
And I was in fifth grade. So I remember September 11th very, very well. And to be honest, that probably also contributed to me wanting to be intel because I was like, I don't want another attack on America. My aunt she lived in Queens at the time. She had it on recording of the Twin Towers falling down. And I just remember just how the nation just came together though. Like the patriotism and like it's just different now. And so I don't think a lot of people would agree with me as far as that goes. But and especially now everything's so politicalized. I mean, you're either left or right, like there's no in between and you can't have an opinion without someone jumping down your throat. And opinion on what America should be or how America should be. It's just a different time. And so I don't think a lot of people would agree with my statement because a lot of people from my algorithm, which is kind of frustrating, is they don't have that sense of pride of being an American. So I don't think a lot of people would agree with me right now.
What do you attribute it to where, where we are now, where it is so politicized, where it is such a rift, where it is so like you're either left, you're either right, there's no in between. And even if you try to be in between, both sides will shun you, if you will.
Yeah. I mean, even the halftime show this past weekend was just so polarizing. And it's like, it just boggles my mind. And I think the reason why is social media and the access to it. So as we were growing up, right, we had AOL, we had chat rooms and stuff like that. We had MySpace, but like we didn't have an iPhone where we could constantly doom scroll all of this content. And so I think because the algorithm is changing based on what you're watching or what you're stopping for, you're going to start seeing more of that and you're not going to see the other side. So I think that probably contributed a lot to the polarization is just social media and how the algorithm is creating like your like for you content. No, I was like, that's just my personal opinion. I think it just social media just because you're not getting both sides. You don't know what's accurate. People aren't fact checking. Like for instance, like the Super Bowl, the Bad Bunny, he handed the Grammy to a 5-year-old. Well, it was blowing up. It was the 5-year-old that was detained by ICE. No, it actually wasn't. And so it was actually an actor, a 5-year-old actor. So people aren't fact checking. They're like, oh, and then reposting, resharing, and then it just keeps going. So people aren't fact checking. Social media's like all this content is like everywhere, and you're just doom scrolling, and it ends up aligning with what you're essentially looking at.
AI has a tendency to be sycophantic. That is to say, like, it will just agree with you. And the purpose
Mm,
that, that the AI tends to want to provide you with a service, regardless of
yeah,
how erroneous or absurd your request may be.
yeah.
Now naturally, like, we've developed sort of like guardrails and different methods to kind of like prevent that from exacerbating or escalating to a degree where it's like legitimately dangerous. But it's still a very relevant and prevalent thing where like
Mhm,
you prompt it enough and it's going to continue to agree with you.
mhm,
I think you're absolutely right. We started to see that with social media because like you said, that algorithmic sort of delivery of content, I mean, it becomes your echo chamber and
mhm,
it's wild because like, I actively try to like engage with folks who perhaps differ in opinion from me. So how do you close that loop? We have discussions with people. We don't lose that sort of like human connection where like
mhm,
you're actively engaging with other people in real
mhm.
time.
I know. And I mean, I agree with everything that you just said, right? Like we need to have more conversations. But with that being said, we also need people to be open-minded and respectful of other people's perspectives, right? Like I tried to have a conversation with I don't know. It was something political and it did not work in my favor. And I was like, never again am I going to have a semi political conversation because, like, I just get my head bitten off. And I'm like,
Mm.
why would I want to do that? Like, I'm already stressed. I don't need to be stressed more. So I think people just need to start having conversations, but be willing to have conversations and hear the other side. You could have a certain viewpoint, and I think that's what happens with like our podcast, right? Like for my podcast, kind of going back to the one with eating disorders. I had a certain general idea of what I assumed to be an eating disorder. But then she shared her perspective, her experience, and it changed my mind to, okay, it's also this. So I think like you have to be open, you have to have those conversations in order for anything to continue to grow and for us to continue to have ideas. Because you're right, I mean, you can try to have a conversation with AI, but it agrees with you. And I know recently, there was an article, I don't know who posted it, but about AI, what's it called? Psychosis. And
Mhm.
it just started agreeing with everything. And so people who do have like genuinely mental health issues that should not be talking to AI, because AI was like, no, you are right. Like you are God. You are this. So AI, yes, there is a tool and there is a need for it, but having that human connection to kind of ground you, share other perspectives, I think it's extremely necessary. And we just need to continue to be open minded, have those conversations.
Which goes to the point that you were just making about mental health. And I think that that's one of the biggest aspects that can be either beneficial or incredibly detrimental. And finding that balance, finding that fine line in between
Hmm.
is incredibly difficult. So before we dive into that aspect of things, let me ask you, what AI tools do you use? What do your interactions with AI look like? Um, and yeah, just to share a little bit about that.
Yeah, I'm a huge AI like advocate as well. But you also, and I'm going to caveat with this too, is I also feel like a lot of people are just using AI for everything and not genuinely using their brain. And I think there needs to make sure like you're still using your brain while you're using AI. So like ChatGPT, I probably use it on a regular date like basis on so many different things, right? Like when I was studying for boards, I was like, okay, create me a study guide
Mhm.
and neuro, cardio, MSK, or whatever I was struggling with. And then, it'll give me a broad list. I'm like, okay, like break it down, micro dose it by hour what I should be doing. So like I'll do like a lot of delegation or like set up a framework type thing. And sometimes I'll also use it for content too. I'll be like, okay, what are the most common complaints people are dealing with right now as far as chronic pain? And then it'll be like, oh, okay, a lot of people are looking at low back or knee or so then I will tailor my content to that. So like I'll ask AI like, okay, what's going on? Like, how can I use this? And then kind of almost like delegate it like for my podcast. And I know you and I both use Riverside, and Riverside also uses AI. And I will tell you, it has made it tremendously more easier for me to push out episodes because what it's doing is like you could click do the pauses or like eliminate the pauses. So it'll eliminate the pauses because sometimes, there's like a awkward pause and you don't want your listeners listening to that. Or right there where I just said, like you could filter out the uhs and the ums to make it sound more professional. And don't get me wrong, I'm still going in there and making sure it sounds all right. But it does, like I'll use AI, but like, okay, do filter this, and this through my audio. And then so it takes out that. So I'm delegating it. And then I'm like going in and making sure it's good to go. So I'm like, trust but verify sometimes, but it does allow me to do a lot more things because I'm delegating and I'm not constantly having to overload or overstimulate myself with like content or even with research. I'm like, okay, is there a research article within the past 10 years about X, Y, and Z? And then I do use that a lot for like research evidence based stuff as well.
Right. It literally is. It's a tool that should be
Mhm,
used to refine your skill set,
mhm,
improve on the things that you've already built. But I think the most important thing you said is to not lose your ability to critically think. Like
mhm,
you have to maintain that precisely what you said, trust but verify. All that means is ask, like, is this accurate? Like at the end of the day, you cannot just take any one thing for granted and just assume for it to be true,
mhm,
right? And I think that chasing that curiosity, chasing that constant questioning of like, is this accurate? Is
mhm,
this real? Is this factual? Is what leads to a more not only a more refined and improved understanding of whatever it is that you're researching, but it lets you hone in on that human aspect of genuine intrigue. People should maintain that ability to critically think. People should continue to ask questions, continue to stay curious about the world
mhm,
and ultimately not let go of that human interaction. Um,
mhm.
I love it. I love it. Seriously, thank you so much. I really appreciate your take, your opinion, your stance on so many of the things that you do. Um, before I let you go, uh, where can people find you? What do how can people support you, support your content, support your work? But please, by all means, like let the audience know where they can find you, what you're doing, and how they can support you.
Yeah, well, first off, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure talking to you. So, my name is spelled a little weird. So, it is Brittiniee. There's three I's. People usually forget the second I. And then Wick, like John Wick. So, Wick. Or does that date me? Anyway, it's Brittinie Wick. And you can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on Instagram. You can find me on Facebook. My podcast is Women Serve Too. It's on Spotify. It's on almost any major podcasting platform. You just put in Women Serve Too. I have it on YouTube too. It just doesn't get as many hits. But yeah, I'm everywhere. You just search my name, I'll probably pop up.
Brittany, thank you so much for being on the show. Again, genuinely appreciate you, your mission, and everything you're doing. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been another episode of the Vector Podcast, and we will catch you on the next one. Thank you so much.